Hello and welcome to World Panorama. I'm Aishwarya Kapoor with you. All the international news stories that made headlines this week are coming up in the next 30 minutes. First up, the headlines. Netanyahu secures a record of fifth term to become Israel's longest-serving Prime Minister. His Likud party to form coalition government at the centre. Prime Minister Modi says looking forward to continuing to work with him to take bilateral relationships to new height. Mohammad Nasheed's MDP party wins a landslide win in Maldives polls. Former president makes a dramatic return just 5 months since returning from exile. Vows sweeping democratic reforms and an end to government corruption. Military coup in Sudan. President of 30 years Omar al-Bashir arrested. Military council dissolves government, suspends constitution. Protesters defy curfew, demand civilian government. EU grants UK 6-month Brexit extension that pushes the Brexit date to 31st October. Also warns Britain, do not waste this time. May presses lawmakers to find consensus. And WikiLeaks co-founder Julian Assange found guilty of violating bail conditions in London court. Assange arrested over US federal conspiracy charges. UK to decide on his extradition. The top story this week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is heading for a record fifth term in office and would become Israel's longest-serving Prime Minister. Netanyahu's Likud party has won 36 and surpassed the main rival, the Blue and White Party, in the election. Netanyahu now needs to form a governing coalition with at least 61 members in Israel's 120-seat parliament. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has congratulated Netanyahu and says that he is looking forward to continuing to work with him to take bilateral partnership to new heights.
Benjamin Netanyahu on course to secure a record fifth term as Israeli Prime Minister. This after his main election rival, former Army Chief Benny Gantz, conceded defeat, accepting that Netanyahu had won. Led by Gantz, three former Army chiefs had come together with a TV news anchor turned politician to create the Blue and White Party, leading to the election being a two-sided race.
Given the size of the blocks, this is the reality that Netanyahu has won. However, the fight isn't over. The dialogues continue.
With vote counting completed, Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party finished ahead in Israel's general election with 36 seats. This, with two religious parties and three smaller right-wing parties, Likud would produce a coalition with 65 seats in the 120-seat Knesset or parliament. Contender Benny Gantz's Blue and White Party won 35 seats. However, Netanyahu's win has alarmed the Palestinians. During the campaign, Netanyahu had pledged to annex Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank if re-elected. Palestinians seek a state there and in the Gaza Strip, with East Jerusalem as its capital.
The Netanyahu's government has coalition of right-wing parties who wish to demolish our village in West Bank. Any second, the bulldozers could come and demolish our village, so that the right-wing Israel parties would be satisfied.
Securing his fifth term, Netanyahu will become Israel's longest-serving leader, overtaking David Ben-Gurion, the country's founder. Israel's president will decide who will form the next government after consultations with the heads of political parties that secured enough seats in the parliament. The president is likely to announce his decision in about a week. Prime Minister Modi tweeted his wishes to Netanyahu, saying that he valued their friendship and looked forward to working with the Israeli Prime Minister, who is often referred to as Bibi. Donald Trump also congratulated Netanyahu, saying that his win will help ensure peace in the Middle East. Netanyahu fought the election in the face of looming indictments for bribery and breach of trust offences. The date for a final hearing in the case is yet to be set. However, with his victory now certain, attention will now turn to the corruption case. The Supreme Court will rule on whether Netanyahu can continue in office if he is charged. For his part, Netanyahu has denied any wrongdoing. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
The party of exiled former Maldives President Mohammad Nasheed has won the country's first outright majority in parliament in its democratic history. The final count released by the Election Commission shows Nasheed's Maldivian Democratic Party, or the MDP, won 65 out of 87 seats in parliament in elections that was held on Saturday, a more than two-thirds majority. His party will now rule without need to form a coalition that will provide the Indian Ocean archipelago with the long, elusive political stability. The MDP's closest rivals, the Jamhuri Party and Progressive Party of the Maldives, both won 5 seats. 2 minor parties and independents secured 12 seats among them. Now, what makes the MDP's victory all the more convincing is the large voter turnout. Around 78% of voters showed up to exercise their franchise. Nasheed, who until 5 months ago was still in exile, has vowed to use his party's thumping mandate to usher in a new era of stability and democracy in the Maldives. Nasheed's comprehensive victory was also another rebuke for his rival Abdullah Yameen, who was dumped as president in a shock election defeat in September. In that election, Nasheed was barred from running, but his former deputy, President Ibrahim Mohammed Solih, emerged triumphant over Yameen. The MDP government is also expected to take steps to loosen China's grip. Under President Abdullah Yameen, Maldives had rapidly slid into the Chinese sphere of influence. And Sudan witnessed a military coup this week as the military council dissolved the government and suspend constitution after arresting the country's president Omar al-Bashir. However, protesters who were demanding Bashir's ouster are back, demanding a civilian government. But they are facing the prospect of a long struggle ahead as the military figures who ended Bashir's 30-year rule seem to be preparing to hang on to power. The military said it will remain in control for at least 2 years to oversee the transition of power.
Sudan's defense minister being sworn in as head of the Transitional Military Council. Awad Mohammed Ahmed Ibn Auf took the oath after this Transitional Military Council was formed to run the country for 2 years. The need for the council arose after military ousted Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir and his government. Auf also declared a state of emergency for 3 months and a curfew for 1 month.
I, the Minister of Defense and head of the Supreme Security Committee, announce the removal of the regime, the arrest of its head al-Bashir and his detention in a safe location. I also announce the formation of a transitional military council to take over the administration of the nation's government for a transitional period of 2 years.
There were celebrations seen on the streets of the Sudanese capital Khartoum on Thursday when military declared that 75-year-old leader Bashir was arrested. Military vehicles entered the large compound in Khartoum, housing the Defense Ministry, the Army headquarters and Bashir's personal residence. State TV and Radio and Defense Minister Auf announced the toppling of the regime. They also requested people to follow the curfew.
Citizens are advised to stick to the curfew for their safety and due to the dangers associated with not adhering to the curfew. The armed forces and the Security Council will carry out its duty to uphold peace and security and protect citizens' livelihood.
However, large crowds remained on the streets, ignoring the nighttime curfew declared by the country's new military council. Demonstrators say the military council is part of the same regime. Organizers of the demonstrations called for a mass sit-in outside the military headquarters to continue their strike. Due to the pressure from protesters, the head of Sudan's military council also stood down. Defense Minister Off announced his decision on state TV, naming as his successor Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah Abdel Rahman Burhan. However, protest leaders say they will not leave the streets until the military hands over to a civilian government.
If they don't bring a civilian government representing the Sudanese people properly, our revolution will be incomplete and would not represent the hopes and dreams of the Sudanese people. And for this reason, we will continue to strike.
Countries around the world, including the US, UK and Russia, have called on Sudan's military to bring civilians into the transitional government. The UN and the African Union also issued calls for calm.
The United States strongly supports a peaceful and democratic Sudan. As events unfold, the United States continues to call on transitional authorities to exercise restraint and to allow space for civilian participation within the government. We commend the people of Sudan for their resiliency and their commitment to nonviolence as they express their legitimate demand for inclusive and representative government that respects and protects human rights.
Ousted President Omar al-Bashir was formerly an army officer. He seized power in a military coup in 1989. His rule has been marked by civil war, which resulted in South Sudan becoming independent in 2011. Bashir won consecutive elections in 2010 and 2015. Since December 2018, protests over deteriorating economic conditions and price hikes of basic commodities have taken place. Soon, demonstrators began calling for the president to resign and his government to go. However, people are not happy with this military coup either, as there is no clear roadmap for how the generals plan to hand over the power to civilian rule. Demonstrators' fear is that military has no such intention. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
The European Union has forced Britain to accept a 6-month delay to the Brexit process, with an option to leave earlier if the UK Parliament can agree a deal. The decision came at a tense summit of divided European leaders in Brussels. After a working dinner that dragged long into the evening, leaders of the 27 remaining nations agreed another delay to Britain's scheduled withdrawal from the EU, this time until 31st of October. The UK was meant to leave the European Union on 29th of March, and this was later extended to 12th of April. Big relief for British Prime Minister Theresa May. European Union giving Britain a 6-month delay to the Brexit process. Leaders of the 27 remaining EU member states met for more than 6 hours before agreeing after midnight to postpone Brexit until 31st of October. European Council President Donald Tusk presented the offer to May, who had asked for a delay only until 30th of June. But European leaders were unconvinced by May's promise that the UK would get its house in order to leave by the end of June.
The European Council decided to grant the United Kingdom a flexible extension of the Article 50 period until the 31st of October. This means an additional 6 months for the UK. During this time, the course of action will be entirely in the UK's hands. It can still ratify the withdrawal agreement, in which case the extension will be terminated. It can also reconsider the whole Brexit strategy.
Before agreeing on the long Brexit extension, there were differences among European leaders. French President Emmanuel Macron had advocated for a shorter Brexit extension, while German Chancellor Angela Merkel argued that the delay should be extended. While Macron was persuaded to accept the October deadline, he forced EU to agree to a review process at the end of June, when Britain will be assessed on assurances that it will remain a constructive partner in EU business, even if it is on the way out of the bloc.
What convinced us that we had to grant an EU extension? The fact that for the first time in 2.5 years, Theresa May explained to us that she had begun discussion with the Labour Party, which could allow her to build a majority. I have no idea if that will succeed, but 31st October limit offers us protection.
The new extension, which falls on Halloween, means that Britain will more than likely have to hold elections for the European Parliament on 23rd of May, nearly 3 years after the British people voted to leave the European Union. May has always said that she never wanted the UK to take part in those elections. May says she could still manage to get her withdrawal agreement passed through Parliament to avoid the UK taking part in those elections. If the UK can agree a deal by 22nd of May, the country will not have to hold European elections.
I continue to believe we need to leave the EU with a deal as soon as possible. And vitally, the EU have agreed that the extension can be terminated when the withdrawal agreement has been ratified, which was my key request of my fellow leaders. For example, this means that if we're able to pass a deal in the first 3 weeks of May, we will not have to take part in European elections and will officially leave the EU on Saturday, the 1st of June.
The extra breathing space granted by the EU comes with the instruction that the Brexit deadlock in London needs to be broken. That means that the ball is again in Britain's court. So far, cross-party talks between UK's Labour and Conservative parties have led nowhere. Sticking points are there, including the issue of UK remaining in a customs union after Brexit, the Irish backstop, a provision to prevent a hard border on the island of Ireland, also has to be resolved. May says that further talks will take place with the opposition in the coming days. She must ensure that a consensus emerges on a Brexit deal within her country. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. The fatal crashes of two Boeing 737 MAX jets 6 months apart have set off a flood of lawsuits against the manufacturer. This after the investigation showed that it was Boeing Max's software MCAS that forced the plane's nose down before impact, leading to crash, and Boeing CEO apologizing for the tragedies. Now, lawsuits alleging wrongful death and negligence have been filed. The two crashes are that of Ethiopian Airlines on 10th of March and of last year's Lion Air in total cost 346 lives. Meanwhile, Boeing is scrambling to come up with a software fix for MCAS.
This is Sela Idimuli from Kenya's Eldoret town. Her heart is filled with grief as she keeps looking at her daughter's funeral program, browsing her late daughter's photographs on phone photo album. Her daughter Juliet was among the 157 people who died on 10th of March when the Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft nosedived and crashed 6 minutes after taking off from Addis Ababa.
We are all sad. We are very sad in the family. We have lost a very nice number 2.
In the other Kenyan town of Nakuru, Quindos Karanja Jr. stands by a gravesite as he grieves the death of his 5 family members in the tragic plane crash. The bereaved families of victims of the tragedy say the US plane manufacturer Boeing is doing little to ease their grief after the company's CEO Dennis Muhlenberg apologized to the victims' families last week.
It's good that Dennis came up, the CEO of Boeing came up and owned it up. But all we want is before these planes go back to the skies, they make sure everything has been taken care of. We don't have to have such a tragedy because it's a pain. It's very painful.
Boeing CEO offered his fullest apology last week, saying that the company was sorry for the deaths in the Ethiopia crash, as well as the other fatal Lion Air crash in Indonesia that killed 189 people in October 2018. This after the investigation into Ethiopia Airlines crash described how the plane's software, MCAS, automated anti-stall system, forced the plane's nose down before impact. Pilots of each plane struggled in vain to regain control. Dennis Muilenburg confirmed that both planes experienced similar issues with their software. He added that a software update for the MAX 8 jet would prevent further disasters.
We at Boeing are sorry for the lives lost in the recent 737 MAX accidents. These tragedies continue to weigh heavily on our hearts and minds, and we extend our sympathies to the loved ones of the passengers and crew on board Lion Air Flight 610 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. All of us feel the immense gravity of these events across our company and recognize the devastation to the families and friends of the loved ones who perished.
After the apology, families of the victims of last year's Lion Air crash in Indonesia have been emboldened. Many more are now suing Boeing, saying CEO Muilenburg's comment related to the software was an admission that helps their cases. Many families have faced a painful process against Boeing and Lion Air in their battle to get compensation. They say the two crashes now should be tied as one.
The Ethiopian Air crash and the Lion Air crash are so similar, they should be tried together as one case.
Meanwhile, Boeing has cut production of its troubled 737 MAX airliner, underscoring the growing financial risk it faces the longer that its best-selling plane remains grounded after the two crashes. Boeing had already suspended deliveries of the MAX 8 after regulators around the world grounded the jet. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
All right, let's get you some more international news in Global Buzz. WikiLeaks co-founder Julian Assange was arrested on Thursday from London after a British court found him guilty of breaching his bail conditions in 2012. This after the Ecuador embassy in London withdrew the asylum granted to him after staying in the country's embassy in London for 7 years. Assange faces a sentence of up to 12 months. He will face another court hearing on 2nd of May on a request made by the US for his extradition. Assange sought a refuse at the Ecuador embassy in June 2012 after he lost an appeal against extradition to Sweden for questioning on allegations of rape and sexual assault. He claimed asylum on the grounds that he feared ultimate extradition to the US, where he faces a possible death sentence for WikiLeaks' alleged leak of American secrets. And the Israeli spacecraft Bereshit crashed onto the moon on Thursday. This after a series of technical failures occurred during its final descent, shattering hopes of a historic controlled landing on the lunar surface. The unmanned robotic lander suffered periodic engine and communication failures during the 21 minutes of its landing sequence. Bereshit had traveled through space for 7 weeks in a series of expanding orbits around Earth before crossing into the moon's gravity last week. So far, only 3 nations have succeeded in carrying out a soft landing on the lunar surface: the US, Soviet Union, and China. And now news from Algeria, where protests continued despite the resignation of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Bouteflika was forced to step down after serving as the president of the country for 20 long years, as discontent against his rule translated into mass protests. After Bouteflika resigned, the Speaker of the Upper House of Parliament has been appointed as the interim president, but people are still not happy. They are pushing for sweeping changes, a wider overhaul of the entire political system. When Algeria's leader of 20 years, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, announced that he was resigning after weeks of mass demonstrations against his rule, there were celebrations in the country everywhere. Thereafter, Algeria's parliament appointed its upper house chairman, Abdelkader Ben Salah, as the interim president, who pledged to organize free elections within 90 days.
The constitutional duty in this particular circumstance makes me carry a heavy duty of responsibility, and it will be by the grace of God and His good help in the direction that leads to the achievement of the ambitious goal sought by the Algerian people.
However, shortly after the announcement in parliament, hundreds of protesters took to the streets in central Algiers, chanting, "Ben Salah, go away." For the first time in 7 weeks, police in the capital fired tear gas to try to disperse the protesters, who were also hit with water cannons.
We are here for the demands of the people. The demands of the people meet the demands of the people. Let the people come out victorious.
While the appointment of Abdelkader Ben Salah as interim president follows constitutional rules, it goes against the demands of demonstrators who are pushing for him and other veteran politicians to stand down. In fact, the protest movement is calling for a new transitional framework that is committed to deep reforms and organizing free elections.
We have come out today in order to oppose Ben Salah. Ben Salah, leave. We don't need you.
Not just protesters, but opposition parties also refused to back Ben Salah's appointment and boycotted the session. Worse, the 77-year-old Ben Salah is seen as being very close to ailing former President Bouteflika. From the start of the protests in February, the demonstrators have not just been focusing on Bouteflika. Placards and online posts have been demanding an end to the system, or le pouvoir, meaning that all those around the former president should also go.
We are here so the ones who are governing the country leave, because they are robbing and not building the country. They are destroying it.
Peaceful demonstrations have been taking place for weeks, but protesters want more radical change. Bouteflika was accused of being used as a front for a group of businessmen, politicians and military officials who are set to really run the country. Protesters want all of them to go. The Human Rights Watch has also given its support to the demonstrators, saying that Bouteflika's departure was only a first step in ending autocratic rule, adding that during transitional phase, authorities should fully respect the rights of Algerians to speak, assemble and associate with one another. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And finally, astronomers at last captured an image of the unobservable, a black hole, a cosmic abyss so deep and dense that not even light can escape it. The first ever image was captured by the Event Horizon Telescope, or the EHT program, which is an international cooperation program set up by over 200 researchers from across the world. To image the black holes, the EHT stationed 8 radio telescopes around the world to observe and collect data of the same targets at the same time. The image captured is of the black hole, which is 50 million light years away in a galaxy known as M87. So take a look at one of these cosmic monsters, black hole, that was captured. As I take your leave, I'll see you next week in another edition of World Panorama. Bye-bye.